Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take some source material, could be an article, notes, research, and we really dig into it for you. Pull out the key points, the interesting bits. Think of it as getting you up to speed quickly. Today, we're diving into a very specific account. It's from a transcript, and it describes a moment, about 6 months into a previous administration. President Trump took some pretty significant action related to protests happening in Los Angeles. And our source details that action, but also, importantly, how different people reacted. Different authorities, observers. You have a source for this deep dive. It's an excerpt from a YouTube video transcript. The channel is called Keith Edwards. And it definitely offers a specific perspective on these events, has direct quotes, observations from the commentator. So our goal here, our mission, is to walk you through this particular account, highlight the actions the transcript describes, the reasons given in the source, and these contrasting views from officials and observers, again, as presented in the source. It paints a picture, this transcript does, contrasting what it says happened on the ground versus the official rhetoric. And it includes a view from local law enforcement that the source commentator found, well, pretty notable. Okay, let's unpack this source then. So the main thing, the central action described right at the start of this source material is President Trump ordering the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops to California.
Right, and the source frames this, notes it happened just 6 months into that presidency. And it says this was reportedly over protests that the source itself describes as peaceful. The commentator in the transcript actually calls the move unprecedented, and the timing is highlighted too. It apparently happened a few hours after mass immigration raids in the area, according to this account.
Okay, so raids first, then the Guard deployment. What about the justification? What reasons did the president give, according to this transcript?
Well, the source quotes him directly, saying he was going after rapists and criminals, targeting people described as a drain on society. That's the language cited.
But the source,
yeah,
it pushes back on that description of who was targeted in the raids.
Oh, very much so. It presents a really different narrative, describes the people affected as just working, trying to get by each and every day. It gives specific examples, too, supposedly from footage or commentary it's drawing on. Things like garment workers from the fashion district, kitchen workers at LA restaurants, even workers taken off construction sites. And it throws in a detail about one person picked up from a construction site in Alabama who the source claims was actually a U.S. citizen.
Wow.
And the description of the scene, as the source commentator presents it, it's people who sew clothes and cook food,
Right.
And they're being met with tactical gear, war machines used against them. That's the phrasing. The transcript includes some specific, quite graphic anecdotes the source says happened, like a mom in Arizona being manhandled by 3 dudes screaming, "Please don't take me, my kids are in school." And it mentions kitchen workers in California objecting when IC removed people right from the kitchen while they were working.
Jeez.
There's also this description from the source of kids being zip-tied, apparently after their mom was detained at a scheduled immigration court hearing.
So the source is really setting up a stark contrast.
Exactly. It explicitly contrasts its view that these are people who help the economy running, who are not a drain on society, with the president's quoted reasons.
Okay, so that's the administration's justification versus the source's description. But the transcript also brings in the Department of Defense perspective, right?
Yeah.
And talks about escalation.
Yes, it does. It zeroes in on the defense secretary at the time, Pete Hegseth's position, as presented in the source. And his description of the protests, sharply different from the source's own view again. He's characterizing them as violent mob assaults on ICE and federal law enforcement.
Violent mob assaults.
And even a dangerous invasion facilitated by criminal cartels. That's the quote in the source.
That's strong language compared to peaceful.
Very. And his declared action, as the transcript presents it, was immediate. The Department of Defense is mobilizing the National Guard immediately.
And the escalation threat.
Yeah, that's highlighted quite a bit in the source. Hegseth is quoted saying that if the violence continued, active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton will be mobilized, stating they are on high alert.
Marines on high alert.
Yeah.
And how did the source commentator react to that specific threat?
With disbelief, it seems. The transcript includes the commentator asking, essentially, on high alert for what? Especially given the source's own earlier claim that the protests were peaceful.
Right. Makes sense from that perspective.
And the source connects Hegseth's statement. It interprets it not as like an operational assessment of the actual situation on the ground, but more as a statement about power and the use of force and the use of military in a democracy. That's how the source frames it.
So a political statement more than a tactical one in the source's view.
That seems to be the interpretation. The commentator is quoted directly in the source saying something like, no rational person in my field in Homeland Security would see what we're seeing and think that we're even close to the kind of behavior that Hegseth is now threatening against the civilian society for protest.
Okay, so you have the federal perspective clashing with the source's description. What about the state level? The transcript mentions Governor Gavin Newsom's response.
It does. It brings in that state versus federal dynamic. Newsom is quoted in the source calling the federal move purposefully inflammatory.
Inflammatory.
Yeah, and saying it would only escalate tensions.
And did Newsom, according to the source, feel the federal help was needed?
No, the source mentions Newsom claiming at the time that LA authorities are able to access law enforcement assistance at a moment's notice, that there was, quote, currently no unmet need for federal troops. He apparently also pointed out in the source's account that the National Guard was already busy with recovery efforts elsewhere. So Newsom is quoted saying this was the wrong mission for the Guard and that it would erode public trust.
But legally, could the governor stop it?
Right.
What does the source say about the authority here?
That's a key point the source delves into. It explains the legal basis cited for the president's action. According to the transcript, the authority comes from Title 10 of the United States Code. Right. And it clarifies, or the source clarifies, that this code allows the president to federalize National Guard units, to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful accommodation, or conspiracy. That's the wording used.
Seems broad.
The source commentary agrees, calls it so broad, compares it to the Insurrection Act, but says it's distinct.
Okay, so the president has this power under Title 10. But what about the governor? Can he push back?
Well, this is crucial. The source presents a finding about the governor's power in this specific scenario, as described in the transcript. And it says, basically, no. It states, there is no authority for the governor to stop the president of the United States from nationalizing the National Guard in his state if the president so chooses.
Really? So the federal decision just overrides the state?
According to the source's interpretation of Title 10 in this context, yes. The president's federalization supersedes the governor's authority. The source actually quotes the commentator saying Gavin Newsom can't do anything about this.
Wow. Okay, that's a significant point about federal power presented there. Now, you mentioned a perspective from local law enforcement earlier. The LSPD. The source found this surprising.
Yeah, the source commentator highlights this, makes a remark like, you know how badly you gotta mess up when the LAPD is like, oh, this is too intense for even us? That's the flavor of the comment.
So what did the LAPD actually say, according to the transcript?
Well, the transcript includes what it says is the LAPD's official statement from that time. And the LAPD is quoted saying, today, demonstrations across the city of Los Angeles remain peaceful.
Peaceful.
And we commend all those who exercise their First Amendment rights responsibly.
Okay, so directly contradicting the violent mob description from Hegseth, at least in their assessment.
That's certainly how the source presents it. The statement, as relayed in the source, apparently continues, appreciating the cooperation of organizers, participants, and community partners who helped ensure public safety throughout the day. And, critically, confirming that today's events concluded without incident.
Without incident, okay. And how does the source commentator use that LAPD statement?
Uses it to push back hard against what the source calls the right-wing narrative that there were riots, there's chaos in the street.
Right.
The commentator points out, the LAPD was closer to this than anyone, and their official statement, according to the source's interpretation, just completely contradicted that narrative.
Interesting juxtaposition there. Local police saying peaceful, no incidents, while federal rhetoric talks about mobs and the military response escalates.
Exactly. That contrast is central to the source's account.
Does the source broaden the context beyond this specific LA event?
It does, yeah. Towards the end, it draws a comparison, a pretty pointed one, actually, to the events of January 6th. It claims President Trump wouldn't do it, meaning send the National Guard, when asked by figures like Schumer, McConnell, Pelosi during the attack on the Capitol. But the source argues he is sending it to LA over a few protesters, and the source commentator calls this comparison absolutely ridiculous.
So what's the source's overall takeaway or concern, then, based on this comparison and the events described?
The overarching concern, as it's expressed in the transcript, seems to be that this whole LA situation was maybe exaggerated, that it was a small event that happened, that there really wasn't any chaos.
And that the response was disproportionate.
Yes, and that maybe President Trump and Pete Hegseth jumped on the moment they could to try to inflame this situation. That's the suggestion in the source.
And looking forward. Does the source express worries about the future?
It does. It voices worry about future incidents, posing the question, essentially, how much more will Donald Trump and Pete Hex do to use the military against American citizens? That's the concern raised.
Okay. And does the transcript end with any kind of message for the listener?
Oh.
For you?
Yes, it concludes with a pretty direct message and a call to action. The source says things like, "We have to watch this, and we cannot allow this to go unnoticed." It urges listeners, you, to push back in whatever way you're comfortable in doing it, whether that's protesting in the street, posting online, or even just paying attention.
A call for vigilance and action.
Right. And it emphasizes a belief in citizen power, saying the power comes from us, not just elected leaders like Schumer or Newsom or Pelosi. It even cites an example where Fox News was allegedly kicked out by protesters, presenting this as an illustration of how, in the source's view, the people have the power.
Okay. So pulling this all together, looking at the account presented in this specific source,
Yeah.
what's the main picture it paints?
Well, based solely on this transcript we've been unpacking, the core tension is definitely this stark contrast, isn't it? Between the federal administration's description of events and its actions versus the descriptions offered by the source commentator, by the state governor, and maybe most pointedly by the local police department as presented in the source. Our deep dive today really just focused on laying out that specific account from this one transcript.
And it really highlights something important, I think. Understanding complex events often means you have to dig into different sources, look at the details they choose to present, the perspectives they emphasize, just like we tried to do here with this transcript.
Absolutely. And this source material, it definitely leaves you thinking, doesn't it? About things like the nature of presidential authority under laws like Title 10, which the source describes as being so broad, potentially overriding state authority. Or it leaves you considering the source's assertion about where power ultimately lies, with citizens taking action or paying attention. That's certainly a thread running through the end of the transcript.
Yeah, definitely food for thought there. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the account presented in this particular transcript. We hope walking through it gives you a bit more context on this specific moment, as described by this one source. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.